our first panel of the afternoon, which is harnessing rural energy, because of course rural areas with low population density have really implicit challenges for developing economically. And just, you know, the very fact that they generate relatively high costs for rural households, even though at the same time there is the potential for great benefit from the green transition. We're going to be unpicking some of these issues and find out just how you can empower small, rural, Scottish and Arctic communities to really take a stake, an economic stake in these renewable developments and benefit from them as they go along. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Martin Tulloch, who's Head of Energy System Integration at the Net Zero Technology Centre. Welcome. I think we're going to move this as well, yeah. Also, Rasmus Wendt, who's Chief Growth Officer at Nuna Green. Hello, welcome. Please also welcome to the stage Johannes Hjel-Høyem, who's a Renewable Energy Advisor for the Arctic University in Norway, UIT. Welcome. And Francesco Sindinco, Carbon Neutral Island Project Lead from the Scottish Government. Welcome to you all. So Martin, if I could speak to you, I mean, could you just tell us a little bit about the Net Zero Tech Centre and what it aims to achieve? And do you think some of the projects that you've got ongoing could be a real game changer for Scottish communities?
No, absolutely.
And potentially Arctic, if we can spread the knowledge.
Well, absolutely. I think potentially global. I think what we're doing, we're established 6 years ago in Aberdeen, funded by government, so we're public funded, but the key thing about us is that we co-invest in technology in partnership with industry. So our remit is to basically accelerate technology and infrastructure that we need to get to net zero. So we have got that co-investment model. We've invested about 90 million so far from our own funds, but we've leveraged in 140 million from the private sector. So basically our remit is anything that helps us get to net zero. My own team looks after hydrogen, carbon capture and offshore wind, so 3 huge growth opportunities. The reason I'm here today is that we also work in partnership with Shetland Islands Council on the Orion Clean Energy Project. So that's a really exciting project up in Shetland, looking to harness the natural resource, but to do it in a way that's aligned with the community's sort of best interests. So really keen to expand on that, but that's a very quick introduction to the Net Zero Technology Centre. I think we'll get into the detail further on in the session.
Absolutely, really interested to find out more, because apparently it's going to be the world's leading clean energy island. So I'll find out a little bit later about how you're going to do this. But Francesco, from your point of view as well, you're leading this Carbon Neutral Island Project Lead. What would you say is one of the most challenging projects you're involved in right now?
First of all, thanks for inviting me. The biggest challenge for this Carbon Neutral Island project, which, just for everybody's information, is a program for government commitment to support 6 islands in Scotland to become carbon neutral by 2040. And the 6 islands are Yell, Hoy, Barra, Rassie, Isla, and Great Cumbria, 1 per local authority. The biggest challenge is laying the foundation so that those who actually decide how to do it are not government, are not local authorities, are not business. It's the people that live on the island communities. So over the past year and a half, we really worked hard to lay those foundations, to really listen to the island communities, to empower them, as you just said, and give them the structures necessary for them to be able to develop a community climate change action plan.
That's a huge responsibility, though, isn't it? I mean, you're giving the communities the opportunity. Yep. But do they have the means? Do they have the data? Do they have the knowledge? And how do you give them that knowledge to make the decision?
Obviously, we all have our different ideas on which islands are already up there. Or you mentioned Shetlands will become. We'll see. We hope so. We could have gone to the 6 easiest ones and say, just, show us the pathway and so forth. With a complex system, I can go into the details, but we identified a mix of 6 islands. Some were closer to that community empowerment, others not so much. So the way we did it, if you want, was by partnering with an organization that had their track record and ties across Scottish Islands, and that is Community Energy Scotland. And I know that there are some colleagues from CS here in the room as well. They have been able to leverage that community spirit. And obviously there's funding there. We didn't do it on a voluntary basis. That's one thing we were discussing before. Often these net zero efforts, especially on small islands, are planned on a Saturday afternoon in a community hall from people who already do 2-3 jobs in the same week. That has to stop. That is not sustainable. We're all for having great teas on a Saturday afternoon, but not if it's the only way to get £400,000 or £500,000 of funding for your renewable energy community project. That needs to be professionalized. But going back to your question, the point is we didn't do it by ourselves. Scottish Government cannot do it by itself, should not do it by itself. We reached out to those who have those skills, in this case CS. CS worked with the communities. A steering group was created. The steering group identified a local anchor organization, and the local anchor organization hired a community development officer, which, this is one of the things we're happiest, in some cases were young islanders who returned to their islands because of the Carbon Neutral Islands project.
Mm-hmm. So that's really helping lots of different factors, including the depopulation trend that we've seen as well.
Just 1 second about that, and then I'll stop talking. I think that's very important because, especially in island communities, and especially the smallest of the island communities, if you just go with the idea, let's do net zero, let's do carbon neutrality for the sake of carbon neutrality, they will throw you out of the island, rightly so, in my opinion. This is about leveraging net zero, leveraging carbon neutrality in order to make, in this case, islands, but it could be anything, more sustainable, more resilient, and more attractive places to live, to stay on, and to bring people there.
Great. So is that your priority, Rasmus, would you say, at Noon Agree? Because this is a commercial vehicle, isn't it, set up to really develop Greenland's sustainable energy project. So have you got the same ethos, would you say?
Now, I think the route that we're going to take will be slightly different. I will also say we have mixed experiences in Greenland on this green transition in rural communities. We will have excellent examples of farmers who have set up their own micro hydropower plant. They are saving a lot of money each year on fuel by doing so. So this is a huge, that would be a huge success. But we will also have small settlements, relying on secure energy, and there it becomes really expensive because the renewable energy in Greenland is not there when it's most needed. That's during wintertime. We don't have that much hours of sun, if any. The wind is not blowing that much. And the rivers will be frozen. So some of the technologies that we can use for renewable energy is simply not there during that time, and that is where we need it for heating. We need to find some kind of mixture. Right now, we can mix renewable energy with fossil energy, oil. In the end of the day, we hope, and that's where Green comes in, we can produce our own hydrogen or ammonia, and we can use that to fuel locally some of the power plants. But I think that would be the way that we have to do it. Then talking about involving local communities, it's extremely important. For instance, solar panels is an important part of the renewable mix in the settlements. And you have to be very careful where you place these solar panel parks, because people don't want to look at them. They definitely want to have clean energy, but they want that you need to put them aside, and so that would be some of the the discussions you will have as well. I also have to say that involving local communities is some of the things that we need to do better in Greenland. And that's also one of the reasons why we're extremely keen to learn from experiences, especially from Scotland, because you have, small islands and many of the same issues and problems as we do have in Greenland. So that's also why we're very keen to learn from Scotland on these issues here.
Okay, well, let's get the perspective for the Norwegian Arctic. Johannes, what would you say the key challenges are from your point of view, and how are you trying to, what projects are you adopting to try and solve them?
Yeah. How are we on time?
Yes. You've got plenty of time. You've got plenty of time.
Can I have 10 Estonian minutes as well? Yeah, the challenges in Norway are a bit different. I mean, first of all, the issue of decarbonization of the electricity system is not the same. I mean, we have about 98% of renewable in the electricity system at the moment. Approximately 90% of that is hydropower, which is really easy to regulate. So we don't have that regulation issues either. I think the Norwegian hydro plants we have the same issues as in Greenland with frozen rivers, but we have at least some more resilient reservoirs, I think, so they work better during winter. And most of the country is, or all of the country, by all practical means, are connected to the grid. So we don't have all these off-grid communities in the same way as you have in Scotland and Greenland. But that being said, we have a lot of communities where the grid connection is not strong enough, and that is an increasing problem in Norway, and that is one of the projects that we are at the University in Tromsø working with together with the local grid company, and where we look at how we can utilize existing grid in a smarter way. The way grid problems have been solved earlier is simply by building more grid. That's one way of doing it, but we have a lot of new technology at our disposal today that might not make that necessary to build that new grid. So the theory we are working with is, can we solve a 300 million grid problem with a 30 million smart grid solution? So we are currently looking at we have installed batteries, which is the logical place to start. We currently have installed 2 batteries on the island of Senja, south of Tromsø. One of them is actually the largest grid connected battery in Norway. Little applause, maybe. But yeah, good thing I got some applause, because not for long there will be another one soon, which is bigger. So yeah, have to capitalize on that one when I can. And we are looking at load management. I mean, we are surrounding us with a lot of batteries on a daily basis. Water heaters is the most common one that can be used for storing energy and can be used for delaying energy consumption, and also to some extent cold storage, which we have a lot of in the fish processing industry. So you can actually, instead of storing electricity or storing heat, you could store coldness, or lack of a better word. But yeah, so there are some possibilities out there
that you're investigating.
Yeah.
So let me bring you back to Martin. So what kind of round of applause should you get for the Orion project? How far along are you in this kind of big aim that you want to create the world-leading clean energy island?
I think in terms of applause, I'd give a round of applause to the local authority for their vision and getting involved at a very early stage. So about 3.5 years ago, they came to see us in Aberdeen, and they basically said, look, we've got fantastic resource, we know that. We could do with some sort of support to help develop that in the most beneficial way. So we've been working with them for over 3 years now. And to me, there's opportunity across the whole of the Arctic region, the northern North Sea, and a lot of what we do is to try and connect that together, some of the common opportunity.
So tell me a bit about Orion. What does it exactly aim to do? What are you doing? What are you harnessing?
We're harnessing the offshore wind potential to generate green hydrogen and then get that to markets in the UK and Europe. But at the same time, we're looking at the potential to import carbon, maybe sequester that, or do something useful with it. And at the same time, looking at the potential community benefit from that. So both sort of direct benefit in projects, but also the supply chain opportunity. That's something that's quite often overlooked, is the ability to get the local supply chain, the broader Scottish supply chain involved in some of these quite exciting projects.
And how are you doing that? Because what Francesco is saying is that simply people are wearing too many hats. Are you relying on the community to support this? Are you paying them? Is there people with specific roles?
The one thing that the island groups, and particularly Orkney and Shetland, have is that they've got a long experience with the oil and gas sector. They've built up significant funds as part of that through a few very astute politicians in the early days. So in Shetland, the local authority is putting people into full-time posts to help manage this in the best fashion. So we're basically trying to support that process with the technical skills that we can bring, the industry links, and that bigger picture. So Angus Robertson mentioned this morning the potential to connect Scotland to Europe and export hydrogen. So one of the projects that we're at a very early stage in exploring is a hydrogen backbone to connect Sullom Flotta, Cromarty Firth, St Fergus to Germany, where there's huge demand for green hydrogen. So it's that type of joined up approach, and I'd be really keen to explore, maybe in the fringes of this event, the potential to expand that beyond Scotland. We're already starting to look to Ireland. There's 3 pipelines between Ireland and Scotland today that take gas east to west. So could you repurpose those to take Ireland's huge green hydrogen potential west to east and then ultimately to market? So it's that sort of joined up strategic approach that we're attempting to bring.
And what kind of timescales are you looking at? Could there be a phased in, the kind of mixed use approach with gas to start off with?
We're looking at some early local markets initially, potentially the fishing sector, potentially some high price point uses in the oil and gas sector. Looking at ship transport in the medium term, so we're working with Port of Rotterdam to look at LOHC transport of hydrogen, which is a sort of a method that's particularly well suited to oil and gas infrastructure because you transport it as a relatively benign liquid, so you can reuse tanker jetties and storage tanks and pipelines. But then long term, it's that pipeline piece. And if you look at the economics of a pipeline, you can build a pipeline or a pipeline system from Scotland to Europe for roughly £3 billion. That's what our analysis says. If you look at the investment return on that and look at the tariff that you can charge, it's roughly 40 euro cents per kilogram of hydrogen. So if you're shipping hydrogen from Chile or Australia or anywhere else where you've got great resource, shipping it as ammonia is roughly €2 per kilogram. So we'll always have that advantage of being closer to a huge market in Europe, of having pipeline as a route to export. So we need to try and take advantage of that and have that joined up approach to the actual production of electricity. So the production cost of hydrogen will be slightly more expensive in Northern Europe, but we're closer to market and we've got that stability as well that Europe's really crying out for.
And where does the funding come from, longer term? How is this all paid for?
Again, the market for hydrogen doesn't exist, the market mechanism. It's emerging at the moment. There's something called H2 Global, which is the German government's subsidy scheme. Basically, it's a contract for difference for hydrogen. But to get to net zero, we know that the UK needs about 200 terawatt hours each year of hydrogen, which is a colossal sum. It's almost equivalent to the amount of electricity we produce and consume today. Europe's got 10 times the population, 10 times the demand. So the mechanism doesn't exist today. It will evolve. It needs to evolve if we're to get to net zero. And what we're doing at this stage is just trying to plan to make sure that we can capture that. Because if we don't start planning today, when the market does evolve in the early 2030s, you'll miss it.
So, Francesco, how do you work with the Net Zero Tech Centre at all? I mean, do you share expertise, and are you taking some of what they're developing for your own specific projects on the islands?
So, if the first driver of our project is fairness and deliver carbon neutrality in a just way, which brings what I said before, the voice of the island communities. Our second principle is to coordinate, to avoid unnecessary duplication, and really to develop synergies. So not just with centers like this, but there's a center whose name is very similar, the Island Center for Net Zero, which you could almost change the acronym around, and it's somewhat the same. And obviously, because of the name, and it comes from the growth deal, it's very much focused on similar matters that you're doing, but within an island setting. And we have been working very, very closely with organizations such as those. And it's important we do it even more because where we are with the carbon neutrality journey and the carbon neutrality project, we're at a very important juncture now. Because come the end of the month, early let's say in the next financial year, we will have the 6 community climate change action plans in front of us. Now that can be an amazingly beautiful glossy piece of paper that we show around and nothing happens with it. And believe me, island communities are sick and tired of those things. So what we need to do is develop a climate change investment strategy. With them, again, island communities in the driving seat, but this is where we need centers like the Island Center for Net Zero, like your center, but private sector, public-private partnership, leveraging already existing public funds, and really develop that investment strategy, that investment journey, so that the island communities can actually
have a longer horizon, because you're putting all that work in,
but also,
consultancy fatigue.
But you need short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So in the context of our project, the short-term, island communities need to see something happening today, not in 5, 10 years with hydrogen. And let's hope it does happen. You know, these are people who have 3 jobs today, who work on a Saturday for free, doing all these things. If government is serious about this, we need to show something that they can literally see and that is beneficial for them in the short term. Having said that, whatever you mean by net zero or decarbonization, we're talking, I mean, you mentioned millions, you know, globally we talk about trillions, so, you know, the amounts are ludicrous. But we need to find a way to get going as soon as possible, and especially in the small island communities, because if not, as you said, consultation fatigue, voluntary fatigue, I mean, we need to do something quickly.
Would you say there's consultation fatigue a bit in Greenland, or just community fatigue?
I think Greenland is so small, so we need to do everything on sort of a government level, frankly speaking. Our utility company would be the one who will set up, you know, you won't have a settlement that will set up their own energy supply. That's not going to happen. That would be the public utility company.
Does that not risk, though, kind of almost a rejection from the community, that you're moving them to something that they're not ready for? No, I think when you talk with consumers, energy consumers in Greenland, 2 things is paramount. One is the energy cost, and secondly, supply security. If there's a blackout in a village in Greenland during wintertime, we're talking about 1 or 2 days, and then people will literally die. So it's extremely important that you have, you know, a reliable energy source, and it's also extremely important that it's affordable. We're talking about energy poor. You will find them in Greenland. They're heavily depending upon the prices of energy. So for that reason, they are more concerned about cost and security than they are about the other things. And I think that's a huge difference between Greenland and Europe. So that is one thing. The second thing, and that goes into what you're saying, is that we see renewable energy as a lever to get economic independence from Denmark. We have enormous resources, renewable resources in Greenland, from hydropower and from wind energy. We can start utilizing that for hydrogen or ammonia for export, and it becomes a very important economic sector. And I think for that reason, we will also there's a huge support behind this movement towards renewable energy. And where is your funding coming from? And do you think you've got that long-term secure funding going forward?
Right now, we are working on one large development in Greenland that will produce something like 10,000 gigawatt hours yearly. The cost of setting up the hydropower plants and the factories that should produce the ammonia is more than the entire GNP for Greenland. So we will need external funding for these investments. So what we do is that we'll go into the market and invite private investors to come, but we'll also say you need to pay a fair share to the Greenlandic society for utilizing our natural resources. And in the end of the day, the power plants will actually go back and be owned by the government of Greenland. So the funding
how well received do you think that will be? Because this is the difficulty, isn't it? It's a risk. You're testing lots of different, new systems. We've got a whole variety of different energy sources. We don't know yet now which one will be the game changer. Yeah. Obviously, we'll have some kind of mix, but the difficulty with the investment community is they want the benefit of long-term returns.
Yeah. And they can
or short-term returns, in fact.
They want both, that's for sure. But they can easily have a lucrative business here and still pay a fair share to the society. This morning, your cabinet secretary was talking about that Norway had actually taken the right decision back in the 60s within the oil and gas sector, saying that some of the money from these industries need to go back to society, and they created this enormous wealth fund. I think politically we need to take the same kind of decisions in Greenland, and I think it's also something where governments need to talk about, because we're negotiating with exactly the same investors, and of course they will go to the places where they'll get the best deal. So why not try to talk about how can we make sure that the benefits from these natural resources actually go back to the society. Mm-hmm. So it's another discussion. Just to say, the green transition has, even though that people are not directly involved, it has huge support because it's seen as a remedy to build up our economy.
Okay. Looking ahead, would you say, Johannes, that your project would be even more important? We talked a little bit earlier about how ports are developing, the greater demand for energy at ports because of docking ships, with the change in vehicles. Do you think that that's going to mean that the grid, there's going to be even more demand for the technology that you're developing?
Yeah, as I said earlier, we don't have the issue of decarbonizing the electricity mix in Norway. It's already renewable, but what we do need to decarbonize is the transport sector. And one of the challenges we actually already see, this happened, the project started 3 years ago, and we already see we have issues with new fishing vessels with battery systems or hybrid fishing vessels coming into port in these communities we're working with, and wanting access to charging capacity. And we had no idea that that would happen during the project period. And this is happening really, really fast. And it's the chicken and egg, as everyone was talking about earlier. But the chicken is definitely already here, and we need to deal with it. And when it comes to grid, it takes easily 7 to 10 years to build a new grid. So you need to figure out ways to charge these vessels while they are in port without shutting down everything else. So yeah, definitely there is a bigger need for these kind of solutions both in the long term, but especially in this middle term gap between when we can get new grid infrastructure in place.
And Francesco, you're obviously juggling an awful lot of spinning a lot of plates at the moment, juggling a lot of balls, because you've got, not just trying to secure this medium to long-term funding, get communities on board, make sure you're choosing the right technology. How do you go about kind of making that plan and making sure that all of those jobs are being done at the same time?
And finding the data.
Yeah.
I want to emphasize that because for the communities, for the island communities, to develop their own community climate change action plan, they need to get a sense as precise as possible of the emissions generated through their island. And in some cases, some islands do have that. Maybe it's an outdated audit, or maybe it's something they have bits and pieces. Maybe they have it just for the energy, but they don't have it for the waste sector. So one of the things that we also did, and this is very much a combination of efforts from Community Energy Scotland, the communities themselves where possible, and external consultants in areas like blue carbon and land-related emissions. There's been a huge effort over the past year to collate all that data and to present it in a way that is actually understandable. Because a lot of this data can be incredibly daunting to anybody, to be honest. But if presented again at the community hall on a 7 p.m. after all day working, and you come up with technical jargon, they're just, again, just they'll throw you out the door. So you need, to present that data in a relatively serious, professional, but simple way, and that then informs the conversation. It doesn't mean that the biggest part of the pie chart, that's where we're going to do all the action. Quite the opposite. But it does inform, and it does raise some surprises in some cases.
What kinds of surprises?
So for example, in Shetland, those of us who have never been to Shetland or who have a central belt image of Shetland, we think, oh, surely energy is the biggest source of emissions. When really, when you do an audit properly done, it's land-related emissions. It's a lot about peatland. Same thing on Isla, and so forth. Now, that raises a huge amount of issues of what do we even mean by pristine peatland, and how do we go with peatland restoration? But that did come a bit of a surprise. Now, that doesn't mean that your project is doomed and you'll never look at hydrogen again. Clearly not. But it did raise some interesting conversations, let's put it like that. In Shetland, we work very closely with Yale, obviously, and the community up there. But it is important to have that data. The data won't drive you to just one area, but how we do everything in partnership. And you did ask me, well, you did ask two, but not me, where did I want my round of applause? And I mean, the round of applause for us is the 7 community development officers. These are often incredibly young people, recent graduates, who have returned to their island and are driving the process. So when we say the Carbon Neutral Island Project does this, this, and that, it's not Edinburgh, it's not Glasgow, it's not Aberdeen. It's that person on Yale, that person on Hoy, with the other 400 people on Hoy. And that is really something that we need to nurture, we need to continue, and we need to foster.
I mean, State Secretary Norval was saying the Arctic needs to be seen as cool, not just cold. Do you think that the same could be said for the islands of Scotland? Because actually it could help reverse the depopulation and then get all of those skilled people who could really help with the transition.
Well, I mean, depopulation, not on all islands, but on some islands, has been seen as the biggest challenge, and it is one of the biggest areas of work, even within my team, the islands team. But I think our colleague Kate Sanderson from the Faroe Islands said, if you're in the Faroe Islands and you're Faroese, you are the center of the world. And the same thing, if you're from South Ronaldsay, somebody here was from South Ronaldsay is the center of your world. Same thing for if you're from Orkney and so forth. So it's more of a question of perspective. And I do think language is important. And I understand why we use the word hubs of innovation, but let's be careful using that word. Because that then leads to laboratories, which means guinea pigs, which means, and if you live in an island community, and Egg is the clearest example. Egg has Chilean researchers on a Monday, then Glasgow students on a Tuesday, then you have the center of who knows what hydrology of Spain. They are, I'm not saying they're sick and tired, they're quite proud of all they did, and especially of renewable energy, but these are people. These are not laboratories of innovation. No, I understand why we use it, and when I was working only in university, I probably was one of the guilty people as well. But sometimes language is important, and again, by working with the communities, you do get that perception, and that is important. Just talking, interaction, and luckily we can do it in person.
Yes, so Martin, how do you get the communities in Shetland on board this project? I mean, is it because they think, if I do this, actually my energy bills will go down?
That's actually hopefully part of it in the future. We've got 4 guiding principles, call them the Shetland Energy Development Principles, and 2 of them I think are directly, well, they're all community related. There's environment right at the heart of it, supply chain. I think a fair share of the economic value is right at the heart of it too. So there's 2 mechanisms for that. One is looking at how can we secure some sort of revenue from the development. So the model we're looking at in that regard is looking at taking, very similar to onshore wind, they'll work out roughly 2.5% of the total revenue. That's what we're proposing. So let's say that the 3 ScotWind sites east of Shetland, roughly, just under 3 gigawatts. That's maybe 500 million in revenue each year. So that could be potentially 14, 15 million pounds flowing into the community. But in addition, you mentioned energy costs. We're looking at, could we have a mechanism where people in Shetland can get lower, fairer energy costs? Again, that's just something that getting the community together and using some of the existing organisations that we have to build that framework at this stage, we can then have a sort of united front when we talk to the developers.
But can I just jump in there? Because, and I know we all know this in the room, but we need to make it very clear. Not just because you have more renewable energy, not just because you're blessed with all these natural resources, magically the prices will go down. The prices are dictated by very different triggers, not natural resources. I think from an Arctic perspective, it would be interesting, both from research but also from government, to understand how is that working elsewhere? How is that working? Has the Norwegian electricity price gone down, or Denmark or anywhere, the moment renewables got more in the mix? Yes, no, if not, how? If they haven't, what needs to happen in their regulatory frameworks, and what can we learn in Scotland, and obviously a little bit south of Scotland as well?
Because, I mean, that's certainly been a big issue in the UK, given the fact that even though people might be on good energy tariffs and they're using good energy, they've just had to pay exactly the same amount as gas. And how does it work in Norway?
Yeah, it's a widespread misconception that that's renewable energy equals free energy. And that's certainly not the case. I mean, especially for solar in Norway at the moment, it's actually much more expensive than hydro. The blessing and the curse for Norway is that we have had hydro, and hydro is actually the type of renewable that comes closest to free energy. But the matter of the fact is that when you are then linked to the European grid, it doesn't matter if you produce cheap energy, it's the most expensive energy source in the system that determines the price. And that's how we have decided to organize our energy system in Europe, like it or not. Yeah, so it doesn't the production price of the energy isn't always determining what the customer is paying.
Do you think, Martin, if we did have a more of a shake-up of just the tariffs and how they all feed into the main tariff, depending on your choice of renewables or not, that would spur people on, actually? And I mean, there's been such a focus on energy bills and how we can bring them down and how we can conserve energy. But if there's no incentive to switch to renewables, why would you?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of things in the mix here. To me, it's the decoupling piece between the relationship between the gas market and the electricity market at the moment. They're both separate. To make hydrogen work in particular, hydrogen is going to be used predominantly in days like this. We've got next to no wind. I think I checked the grid this morning. We're about 40% reliant on gas. About 20% of the grid mix was renewables. So we need to work at a more nuanced system, almost starting afresh. And that's, I know those discussions are ongoing at various levels. And that, to me, is one of the key challenges. But certainly from a local context, it's crazy when you've got so much low-cost wind resource around all the rural communities in Scotland, and the fact that we export 5-6 times the amount of gas that we produce as a country. To me, that there's a huge opportunity there to basically reinvent things and have a more community-focused approach. And part of that could be local ownership stakes as well, and having local energy supply companies. So basically, at the moment, all options are on the table, and we've got an open mind.
Are you looking at local energy ownership structures for the islands?
There are plenty of examples, community energy, so local energy, we can call it them in different ways. One that springs to mind again from Shetland, in Yale, you have a civil society organization, North Yale Development Council. They have their own 4 or 5 wind turbines. The community benefit that even just 4 or 5 wind turbines can do in terms of minibus for pensioners to go from A to B, the school projects, it's absolutely incredible. And obviously we need to keep that and boost that.
Is that a part of what you're doing as well, Rasmus? Obviously you're talking about the prospects for investment and making sure it goes back into the community, but on a more local level.
No, it's not. And the reason being that you could easily imagine some settlements or small towns where you will construct your own renewable energy supply, and you can do that. That would be a good business case. But it's a very strong political wish in Greenland that we have, we keep the settlements and the towns as, and make sure that we have, it's possible economically to live around in Greenland. And in order to do that, we have a one-price policy for energy, and that's the reason why that it will only be the government-owned utility company that will provide electricity. Otherwise, we'll end up in a situation where some of the settlements or some of the towns where it was a good business case would leave the company and make it more expensive to live in other parts of Greenland. So for that reason, we don't do it.
Okay, there's so much to think about in the different setup in different countries. I just want to open the floor to questions. We've got some mics roving around. If anybody would like to pose a question to our experts here on the panel. Yes, we've just got one here at the front. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is more kind of geared towards Scotland specifically. We talked about energy production happening at a local level and not involving top-down government kind of dictator-style kind of rules about how things are done. But when we look at Arctic countries, or more specifically Nordic countries, there's a good deal of municipal government, which is not something that we have in Scotland. I think Highland itself is geographically the size of Belgium, and that is the lowest tier of local government we have in Scotland. There's nothing beneath that. So if we were to enhance our democratic structures in addition to what we're doing for renewable energy in Scotland, would that be something that we could take from our neighbours?
Do we think we need to enhance democratic structures?
I mean, can I take my Scottish government hat out for a second? I mean, I'm Italian. I've always been very puzzled that we don't have small mayors and that who can actually do their jobs and have salaries and not. So, I'm with you there. I do think there's a question of local governance, community empowerment that goes beyond what we have now in Scotland. So,
and maybe it would also solve the too many hats problem if somebody's actually tasked with doing it.
Yes, because, I mean, again, both from research and government, sometimes the problem is also, let's go talk to the island community. What does that mean? Who is the island community? Who is the legitimate person? Now, you have community councillors. So in my, again, Italian kind of thing, well, they've been elected. But then you ask, and sometimes they haven't. So it's a bit awkward in that sense. So yes, but how? I have no idea. And I'll bring back my Scottish government hat for the next question.
Martin, have you got a view on this?
Yeah, well, I guess just a personal example. I grew up in an island Westry in Orkney in the 80s, population about 800. It was declining for a couple of decades. 2005, the community established a local enterprise company, established a 900 kilowatt wind turbine that provides an income of about 300,000 per year. I moved to the Outer Hebrides in 2005. I lived in Point. I was involved in the early stages of the Point and Sandvik Trust, which is the largest community-owned wind turbine in the UK at 9 megawatts. So that takes in roughly 3 million a year to the community. I think we've got a great example in Orkney. There's the James Stockham, leader of Orkney Islands Council. You've got a 90 megawatt community-owned wind farm under development? 70. So again, that sort of magnitude of scale up. But I don't know if you want to make a few comments on that, because it's not a project I know well, but I think it would be really useful for people in the room just to get a better understanding of that project. And to me, it's a great example of local authority proactively involved.
I mean, it was great to have James, I must say, explain to us all about what's been happening in Orkney at Arctic Frontiers. So that was fantastic. And certainly, you've talked as well about the problems of wearing too many hats and community, almost exhaustion, because there is so much that has gone on, and you've just got to keep going, haven't you?
Yeah, thank you. On, yeah? Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I just think taking control of things is the most important and most empowering thing that we can do. And the biggest challenge that we have, and I'm going to ask the panel my question is, where does regulation come in from government, and how debilitating or how restrictive is that? Because that's what we found so often. I mean, for the last 10 years, Orkney's been 120% renewable in its electricity use. but the curtains came down when we could no longer connect to the grid. But when that happened, it made us think, what else do you do? And all the innovation has come out of a restriction, and so many other things happening in the community. But in the end, the local council, you're speaking with small councils, we're so much smaller than Highland, 22,000 people, but we decide to go and embark on putting up wind turbines ourselves to trigger a cable to come to be able to make far more energy. We are interested in hydrogen, but we're also interested in supplying a grid to our own ports, as we've spoken about this morning, so we can feed into batteries ourselves and cut out the middleman to make sure that the community get all the benefit and it doesn't end up. And I'm interested to hear between the two extremes we've got there, from Hoy to the whole of Shetland becoming net zero, because there's a big space in between as well. And how do we manage to get everybody involved? Because it's not just creating things that make low carbon fuels or whatever. How do we decarbonize every aspect of life? And that's where we are now, and we're really interested to collaborate with people. How do we make, I'm really interested in how do we decarbonate agriculture? And I think, well, if we could grow seaweed and put that on our land as we did centuries ago, we take away one part, we can also make products to feed animals with seaweed that cuts the cattle emission. I'm really interested to have climate change cattle as a world commodity as early as we possibly can. And that feeds into all these projects along the line. But it's endless. Could speak about this for the rest of the day, and I shouldn't, but I'm really interested.
Thank you.
I'm interested on the regulations.
And also, let me take as well that point about, I'm going to go to the regulation in a minute, but that point that you made about when communities do start getting involved and really thinking about where their energy is coming from, how they themselves can help support renewable projects. Do you think, Francesco, that they also think about their energy use and become so much more aware about net zero in other parts of their lives?
Quickly to that and then to the regulation. I mean, I think, again, we're talking of the communities as if everybody feels the same in even a small island of 400.
I mean, have you seen
they will have different perceptions. I mean, I do think overall, from what I've seen, yes, there is climate change awareness. So, I mean, there will be a few that may be still skeptical, but overall, there's an understanding. And overall, there is an understanding that, everybody has their own carbon footprint and so forth. But at the same time, they're also very well aware that in the bigger picture of things, and this could apply even to Scotland as a whole, we are still a very small part of the bigger global puzzle that needs to happen for climate change to be dealt with, averted, and mitigated. So it's a difficult thing. In terms of regulation, and this is not answering the question, we mentioned before about the energy prices and everything, and that to me is a lot about regulation and jurisdictional competences and constitutional aspects within this country. But sometimes you have, because in a way what we have here is an old regulation and a too rigid regulation. In other parts of the world, maybe not the Arctic, but in other parts of the world where I work with my other hat, with the IUCN hat, we're looking, say, at the South Pacific, islands in the South Pacific, where there is too little regulation. There is weak regulation. So you have all these islands, put them up their targets. We're going to de-electrify everything by 2030, and we're going to be completely net zero in our energy sector by 2030. But if without regulation, the risk is that this becomes a Wild West kind of situation for rogue investors in renewable energy. There's this idea that renewable is good, and dealing with climate change makes you a good person. And let's not be so naive, There's several investment streams which want to go to the Cook Islands of this world, the Vanuatus of this world, to make money. And making money is not a bad thing, clearly not. But it needs to be done in a regulatory framework that, title of this session, allows the communities to flourish as well. So sometimes you have the opposite problem, where instead of having too much regulation or rigid regulation, old regulation, you just have either no regulation at all or very lax regulation.
Johannes, what would you say about regulation as far as your projects are being concerned? Has it helped or hindered?
Well, no regulation is clearly not a good idea, and too much regulation is so something in between. Actually, what we see in our project is that technology isn't the challenge. It's and we were well aware of that when we started the project as well. That a lot of these things we are testing is more or less well-known technology, but it's the regulation, how this technology is going to be used. Within the framework, legal framework that we have today, which is challenge. I can give one example. The battery that we installed, the one you uploaded for, it's currently owned by the grid company, the DSO, which is a logical owner of, they are the one who reaps the benefits from the battery. It's logical that they own the battery. But they are, the DSO is the local grid owner is has a monopoly on running the grid, which is a logical solution. So they are very heavily regulated, and they are not currently allowed to own batteries. So they can the only way they are allowed to solve grid problems today is to build more grid. And as you say in the English language, if a hammer is your only tool, every problem looks like a nail. So
Yeah.
So that's a regulatory issue that we run into, and that hopefully will be changed. It's a fairly easy one to change, but this has never been, since the technology has never been an option before. It's never been a need for changing that regulatory issues. And then there are several other regulatory issues that are more challenging to solve, definitely. So yeah, the regulation is really important in these issues.
Okay, well, let me move to Rasmus. Would you say that in some ways in developing the projects that you're doing, you actually are helping devise the regulation? Because I suppose it is so new.
Yeah, it is. Perhaps I should do a disclaimer first. I used to be heading the energy department in the Greenlandic government, so I used to do the regulation.
Oh, right,
So
okay.
of course I'm very fond of it. But the regulation is set up in a manner so we can secure supply all over Greenland, and that's the main purpose of the regulation, basically. We need to change that if we want to develop the renewable energy sources we have. We need to change that regulation, because there's not really room for larger industrial projects right now. So that's one of the things where we need to go in and change, the regulation in order to make sure that we can actually secure the investments, both from the government side, but certainly also from the private side, to these renewable energy projects. So we are actually working on trying to change the regulation in that direction.
Okay, thank you. It's really interesting that you obviously come from that whole background. I mean, I'd just like to finish, because unfortunately we've got to move to the next panel, but Martin, where should regulation change to make it much easier for you to really achieve your vision?
I think for me, regulation needs to change radically. We need to move much faster than we are at the moment. So basically, I think it's all around trying to look afresh at where the early markets are for hydrogen, for electricity. We need to electrify everything that we can. And basically taking that fresh approach, which is not going to be easy to do. There's a lot of vested interest there. There's a lot of established regulators. So that is ultimately where we need to get to. In reality, I think it'll take longer than we need it to. But yeah, I think a fresh approach and just a bit of political vigour would be fantastic.
Rasmus, given that you were a regulator, how should people go about changing the regulations? You know, what approach should you take? I just have to ask you, given...
Yeah. But the first thing is we have a single price system in Greenland, so you pay the same price for electricity and heat wherever you are in order to secure the small settlements. We need to make it possible for having special prices for industries outside the fishing industry. So that would be one concrete area. Then we need to make it easier for households to set up their own, for instance, solar panels, and sell the electricity to the local grid. You have to understand that all electricity production in Greenland is island operations. So we don't have grids connecting different cities or settlements. So everything is one sort of micro grid or attached to a medium-scale hydropower plant in Greenland. But we need to make sure that it's easier for households to set up solar panels and sell electricity to the grid.
Certainly they feel as though they're incentivized in their actions.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to everybody. I really appreciate you coming on the panel. So much to discuss, and we're going to be picking up some of these themes in our discussion after the break on the just transition. But thank you.